Thank you for joining us for this session of the Starter Pack series. This video is going to be kind of a expansion of one that we did in the fall that was requested. Everybody really enjoyed getting to hear about working on research questions with your students because it's always a challenge, especially for first-time researchers. So this year I asked Kira and Layla, who are with the Teaching Primary Sources Southern Region at Middle Tennessee State University, to come back and kind of expand on what we talked about last year. So to get started, my name is Nikki Ward. I'm the state coordinator of National History Day here in Tennessee, called Tennessee History Day. And this is all we're going to focus on in this session. We are going to analyze or look at the ways that we can explore developing research questions with students. And I think we're going to get to see this modeled so that you can take that back to your students. And then we'll talk about some resources that are available to you as well. If you're joining us live, make sure you're muted, rename yourself so we know who you are, and then use the chat to let us know if you have any questions. But if you're watching this later, then please make sure you fill out the linked survey on the Starter Pack Padlet. This is how I will know that you need a PD certificate for the session. So make sure your name is spelled how you need it on your certificate, as well as your school is spelled out in its entirety. If you work at GMS, that's great, but I may not know what GMS is, so make sure that's spelled out for me. I try to check those weekly. If that doesn't appear in your inbox the following Monday, so if you submit one Wednesday, you don't hear from me that next Monday, feel free to send me an email on Tuesday, and I'll make sure to get that to you as quickly as I can. So I'm going to stop my screen share and give things over to Kira and Layla.
Thanks, Nikki. So let me pull up our PowerPoint. And really excited to kind of again expand a little bit on what we did last year about developing and refining research questions. So this is actually the method we're going to kind of explore is one that I learned about at a Teaching with Primary Sources Consortium meeting several years ago and really loved the activity and the model. And, we've used it in different ways over the years, but as we have thought about how it might work for History Day, I think that it is a really great way to help students to build their skill set in developing questions and really again thinking about how to refine and adapt those research questions as they go through the process. So as Nikki said, we're going to go through, talk about the model, and then we're actually going to do a mock version of it so you can kind of see how it works, and hopefully that will give you some insight about how you can adapt it for your students. So the first thing in thinking about is, how do we identify good questions? And this is something that I think we often overlook, is that coming up with good questions is a skill set in and of itself. And I think a lot of our students really struggle with this. And especially, for students who maybe aren't as accustomed to being in classrooms in the past where that have been very student-centered, that they feel a little uncomfortable asking questions and having things being kind of student driven. So helping them to develop their confidence to ask questions and then their skill set in this can be really important. And again, I think History Day is a great way to do that. So we want them to first feel comfortable asking questions. Ask all kinds of questions. I saw a stat at one point talking about, when, small children, when they, toddler to 5 are asking tons of questions all the time. And then as kids get older, they actually start asking less questions. And so again, we want to get them back to, again, that curiosity where they're asking tons of questions all the time. We also want to think about understanding the different types of questions. Certain types of questions are going to elicit certain kinds of responses. And so understanding what those types of questions are and what types of information we're going to get out of those types of questions. We want to be able to evaluate our question because I'm sorry, but the saying that there's no such thing as a bad question is not true. So some questions are better than others, and we want to think about, again, how do we evaluate those? And again, especially in light of doing research for like a History Day project. We want to be able to prioritize questions. So again, like I said, some questions are better than others. Some questions maybe we need to ask, try to answer before we try to answer others. And so again, figuring out how to prioritize questions based on the types of tasks that students are doing. And then we want to think about refining and asking new questions. And I think this is really, really important when we think about it in a History Day context, that as students are, looking at their research questions, as they are digging into new source material and getting new information and synthesizing that information in, their understanding of their topic, that they're constantly going back to that original research question that's going to, be used to develop their thesis out of, and be able to continue to refine and adapt that and ask new questions based on the information that they have just uncovered. And so again, I think that all five of these are really important as we think about, again, building the skill set for just being able to ask questions. So what we're going to look at is the question formulation technique. And this was developed by the Right Question Institute. Again, this was not us, we are borrowing this. But you can go to their website. They've got fantastic tools. You can register on their site for all kinds of other fantastic things that will help support this. And what this model does is it really starts with what's called a question focus. And so for our mock activity that we're going to do here in just a few minutes, we're going to use the image in front of us as our question focus. And the question focus, or Q focus as they refer to it, is a stimulus for jumpstarting questions. It's the focus for your question formulation. It can be a statement, it can be a phrase, an image, a video, a math problem, an equation. I mean, it can be really anything just that will begin to get questions flowing. The only thing it cannot be is a question in and of itself. So that is the only thing that it cannot be. It should relate, of course, to the content or your intended learning outcomes. So again, you want to get kids thinking in the direction that you're hoping to lead them. And a good question focus is going to be simple and clear, and hopefully is going to encourage some divergent thinking. So again, that you have lots of different types of questions that evolve out of it, that will elicit some good discussion as you go through, and when students develop their first questions, but then as you go back and you begin to review the questions that have been that have come up over the course of the activity. So we're going to come back to this image in just a moment. There are some simple rules. And no matter how many times you do this with students, if you've tried this, after you saw us talk about it last year, you always want to make sure that you are re-emphasizing the rules for the activity, or at least for the first part of the activity. And they are simple. There's just four of them. You want to ask as many questions as you can. You don't want the groups, and usually you'd put your students into groups to do this. You don't want to stop and discuss, to judge, or try to answer the questions. Again, the whole purpose is just to be generating as many questions as you can. You want to write down every question exactly as it is stated. And the reason it's important to write it down exactly as it is stated is because one student may ask a question one way, and that might get another student thinking about, well, I like that question, but maybe I want to adapt it a little bit. And so you would actually, if that student then said it again, but adapted it in a different way, you'd want to write down both of those. And again, that would be really important to think about as you go back later on and are evaluating the questions and having the students to evaluate the questions. And lastly, if a statement is made over the course of the time that you're looking at the question focus, you want to change that statement into a question. So again, four simple rules. And it might be helpful, again, especially if this is a new activity for some of your students, to take a few minutes before you get started, and ask them, a couple questions. So again, after they've looked at and you've talked about the rules, but have them maybe think about, is there one of these that may be more difficult to follow than others? What rule would be the most difficult to follow, and just give them a second to really kind of think through what that process is. So again, in the interest of kind of again showing what this might look like, Layla, thinking about these rules, what do you think is the most challenging to follow?
Hmm. Probably do not stop to discuss, judge, or answer the questions. That one is tough.
Yes, that one is very tough, and as someone who's been on both sides of this, that is by far the most difficult one, because people ask good questions, and then you want to take the time to, like, oh, let's talk about that. Again, that's not the purpose of this activity, so don't do it. And another thing that might pop up, because as you're doing this, you want to assign in your groups, if you're doing this as a group activity, one person who is your recorder. who is going to be the person who writes down all of those questions. And for our activity, that's going to be Nikki. So Nikki, any thoughts about what might be difficult in that role?
Yeah, I would probably struggle. It's funny that that was Layla's answer because my answer is the one that's hard for the recorder. Write it down exactly as it's stated because it's very easy to edit on the fly and especially as, a former educator. So I think that one's going to be challenging.
Yeah, that one can be challenging. And this is, again, depending on the grade level you're working with, you may want to do this, as a class activity, again, whole group, and have the teacher be the one who is the recorder the first few times. And again, just help the students kind of get comfortable with the process before moving them into smaller groups to do this. Because, yeah, those are usually the tough ones. Okay. So,
I
again,
have
this
a
is going to
question
be,
for you,
oh,
actually.
sure.
The fourth rule, change any statement into a question. Is that done in the moment or is that done after? When does that take place?
That should happen in the moment. So, and again, inevitably this happens because we hear questions and we're like, or we see something in our question focus and someone in the group will make a statement. And so really it's the job of the group to police that, to be like, all right, we can't have a statement. So how do we reword that into a question? And so again, does which again in and of itself can be an interesting process because how do we take this statement and reword it so that it kind of gets to the heart of a question that works, but then also still kind of speaks to what the person was getting at to begin with. All right. So this is our question focus. And I am going to also, again, you always want to time this because inevitably what will happen is people will get talking and you will kind of not be paying attention and time will run out. So you want to time it. So for our purposes today, we're going to do just 3 minutes. The other thing that you'll find as you're doing this is that some groups, if you're doing this as a group activity and folks are going, some groups may have a ton of questions just from the jump. And then some groups, it may take them a minute, or they may have like 5 quick questions and then they kind of pause. And that's okay. So every group is going to be a little different. And in fact, it may be helpful for the teacher to get and kind of see, where students are struggling as they are developing the questions. So don't be alarmed if that happens. That is pretty normal. All right, so Nikki is our recorder. Layla and I will be asking questions of this picture. So I'm starting our timer now.
All right. Well,
Well, my first question is who are these people?
yeah. My question is, where are they?
When? When was this picture taken?
Mm-hmm. What are they holding?
Are they all in the same unit? They
Are they all wearing the same uniform?
Where are the men originally from?
Who took this picture?
What is that building behind them?
Why are they taking this picture?
What are they thinking about as their picture is being taken?
Have they fought in any battles?
Where was this picture used?
How was this picture used?
And what is this writing along the top of the picture? What happened to these men after this picture was taken?
Yeah. Where are they from?
How did they feel about having their picture taken?
How old are they?
Was this the first time they'd ever had their picture taken?
Did they get fixed up for this picture?
How did it feel to be able to put on a military uniform? Also, how did it feel to put on a military uniform and be issued a weapon?
Also, did they know how to use those weapons? Oh, why
All
are some of
right,
the weapons different? Oh,
go ahead. You finish your question.
why are some of the weapons different?
All right. So, all right, we're going to give Nikki a chance to actually, before we display our questions. So after your students have had a chance to go through, again, depending on how much time that you've given them, I will say typically 3 to 5 minutes is a good amount of time. The longer that you go over 5 minutes, I feel like groups start to struggle a little sometimes, so that might be something to think about, is in finding the sweet spot time-wise for your students. So after you've had a chance to, again, run through the exercise, students have developed their questions. That's really just the very first step. It is these subsequent steps that you get into when you're assessing your questions where I feel like there is real value in this process. And so the thing that you want to do to begin with, of course, is identify the types of questions that you have. Are they closed or open-ended questions? Some other things, and we'll kind of go through these with all of ours in a second, but just to kind of look at them to begin with, how do different types of questions elicit different types of responses and thinking, and what are the value of each type? You want to go through and then categorize your questions. Again, are they open-ended? Are they closed-ended? Select a couple to rewrite and use as a different type of question. So maybe pick a couple that are open, make them closed, vice versa. And then think about, with those that you have rewritten, how does changing the structure of the question change the question? And then lastly, you want to prioritize the questions. Again, what are the most important? And we'll talk about that in a minute, some ways that you might focus on that. And then explaining the thought process behind that. So before we get into kind of thinking about whether ours are open or closed, it's worth just thinking about, again, what do we mean by open and close-ended? So of course, close-ended questions are those that have typically, very short 1-2 word answers. I like to think of them as kind of the basic, like the who, what, when, where questions, where there is a right and a wrong question, right? Then our open-ended questions are the ones that are going to elicit kind of more critical thinking type of responses. They are going to be more of our how and why questions, where again, students are going to have to think about it. They're going to have to connect prior background knowledge to what they're looking at to really be able to formulate an answer to that question. All right, so Nikki, if you will bring up our list of questions.
I should
All right,
unmute
if you want to,
myself. Here we go. Can you see them?
yeah, if you'll make them just a little bit bigger here for
Yep.
us. All
Better?
right. Yes. So
Okay.
let's go through here and think about which ones are open-ended and which ones are closed-ended. And actually something else I would do is like, you have kind of bullet pointed them. Actually numbering them can be helpful for students. And that might be one of the first things to do once you get finished, is have whoever's been your recorder go through and actually number your questions. Okay. So question 1, closed, right?
Pretty straightforward.
So Yeah, so
Yeah.
closed, 3 closed,
Sorry, I'm behind here.
4 closed,
5
5
is closed.
closed. Probably the first 9 questions are actually all closed.
Yeah.
Do you think that's common when kids first
I
get
do think that
started?
is, yeah, I do think that's
Yeah.
pretty common that you'll see a lot of the initial, quick fire questions are usually closed-ended questions.
Mm.
And then you kind of have a lag, like Kira said, and then you get a little bit more
Mm.
into it.
Yeah.
So,
So, okay, the low-hanging fruit questions, right?
yes.
All right, so 10 is open-ended. I would say 11 is open as well.
Okay.
12 closed,
Mm-hmm.
13 closed, 14
14's
open.
closed. Oh, I got that one wrong.
Why do you think it's closed?
Because I think it's pretty, I guess if you're looking at, depending on how you're looking at it, it could be like, oh, this was used for propaganda, or oh, this was used to promote enlistment. Like, I just think it's pretty straightforward, depending on who's asking it.
And I guess my thinking on the open is to answer that question, you're going to have to look at multiple things,
Multiple
and build an
perspectives.
argument in order to be able to answer that question.
Okay, you're
Because
right.
I mean, again, this is where like sometimes it is like it could be either or. So it
But
might be
I
worth
do
having
see
questions
that.
think about, like, okay, well, why do you think this? Why, so, um,
I like
so
thinking about
15,
how many sources are needed to answer the question. That's
yeah,
nice.
that's a good
Yes.
one. Yeah, that's a good way to think about it too. 15 closed. 16.
I mean, wouldn't that be open? Because you have to think about all of them and all of their perspectives.
Yeah, if you're talking about the unit, it might be more inclined to be a closed-ended question if
Mm-hmm.
you're talking about them collectively. But if you're talking about each of the men, um, because I think that speaks back to another question you asked, was that are they actually all in the same, you know, unit, or is this?
Yeah. Yeah, I think that I think that was probably open-ended, but I think that again, that is one I feel like you could probably make an argument. And again, this is where this is a good exercise because again, sometimes I feel like you can debate these. 17 is closed. 18 and 19 open.
Is 19 open?
I would think 19 would be closed.
Oh, you're right. You're right. 20 is closed. 21 closed. I would say that 22 and 23 are both open. Because I feel like these are questions that again, it's going to be you're going to have to like really pull together some materials to be able to answer those questions.
Mm-hmm.
It's also like, is that even something we can answer?
Yeah.
That's another thing we're going to talk about because
Mhm.
a lot of times you're going to get those kind of questions. Is like, can we answer these questions? Especially when
Mhm.
you're using pictures of people, like
Mm.
Mm-hmm.
24 I would say is closed.
I don't know though, because when you think about like the different perspectives within it, and also just thinking about like the laws and restrictions, depending on where this unit is.
Yeah, but I feel like this one again, that's a yes or no question. Like, do they know how? Yes or no?
Maybe.
The why of do they know how might
Yeah.
be more
Yeah, that would be
open-ended,
one to be
Yeah,
right?
open. Yeah.
that makes
And I
sense.
think again, if we wanted to think about that next step of like how to rewrite some of these, like that would be how to
Mhm.
Mm-hmm.
rewrite that to make it open.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, And then 25, why are some of the weapons different? I feel like that's probably an open-ended question
Hmm.
because you're going to have to get into some
Do you agree, Layla?
varied explanations about rank and who gets what and how they were. Yeah.
Rank,
Well,
age,
well,
everything.
military photography, like there's
Yeah.
oftentimes they strap on whatever they have because it's a show of
Yes.
power, right? So
Yes. All right. So we had 25 questions. And so let's count them. See how many open-ended questions do we have and how many closed-ended questions do we have? So
1,
closed, we
2,
have
17. That's what I got for
yeah, I got
closed.
17 closed-ended, so that gives us 8 open.
Mhm.
And I do think that that's, it is very common, I think, for you to have more closed-ended questions than open.
Mm-hmm.
So in thinking about these, again, when we think about the closed-ended questions that we asked versus the open-ended, the closed-ended questions are going to give us largely, kind of very short 1-2 word answers, right? And how do the open-ended questions, I mean, what are your thoughts on the types of, responses that we would get if we tried to answer those?
Thoughts on the types of answers. Say that again.
So for our open-ended questions, so for example, like, question 14, like, how was this picture used? We talked about like, propaganda, like, so, what types of information are we going to get as we try to answer that question? Is that going to be more, needing to build an argument in order to answer that
Mm-hmm.
question?
Yeah, and
Um,
find some sources to support that argument and
yeah,
really dig into other things to help answer that question.
Other primary sources to help answer that
yes,
Mm-hmm.
question.
yeah.
Yes.
So a lot of times when I've done this activity with teachers, you talked about, okay, so when you think about, again, teachers, ask questions to students all the time, and when you're doing quizzes or tests, like, which ones are your favorite questions? And people are like, oh, closed-ended because I can grade those quick and churn right through those. Those open-ended questions though, like those take a little longer because again, the responses tend to be longer. You got to
Mm-hmm.
really kind of evaluate the student's thought process to understand again how successfully they answered the question. And again, those just then take more time. And I think that that is a way to think about it again, like again, our open-ended questions, you're going to have to show your thought process in those.
Hmm.
How you answer those is really going to show again how you were thinking about the material, how you're thinking about that in relation to the question in order to be able to answer it.
Hmm.
All right, so let's pick one of these and switch it around. So Layla, your
Okay.
choice.
Oh, put me on the spot.
Yeah, just pick one at random.
Mm, so let's do one of the closed because I think that'll be kind of interesting to move it to open. But oh, okay, did you move them? Thank you. I was like, where'd they go?
Well, I'm wanting to keep this in steps of like, here's the pre-edited, here's some edited so that we can have this as a sample for anybody that wants to have this later.
That's so smart. That makes sense.
Except my
Um,
numbers are now crazy.
um, I think we could go into maybe are they all wearing the same uniform?
Mm-hmm.
What number is that? Here they are,
That's
6.
7, 6. Yeah, it's
All right,
6.
so let's rewrite that to an open-ended question. So are they all wearing the same uniform? So
Could we change it to a how question? How
yeah,
are their
like
uniforms different?
how are their uniforms different? Why might they all be wearing the same uniform?
Mm-hmm.
How are all
Their
their
uniforms different.
What was the question you said, Kira?
Honestly, it didn't slip my mind.
Why might they be
Why?
wearing the
Yeah,
same
yeah.
uniforms? Does uniform indicate rank for this
Is that
picture?
closed or opened? Are we
that's
Well, then
wanting
I
true.
think
this
that
to
gets
be
us
an
out into a
open,
whole
right?
series of new questions.
Yeah.
Which is, what we want students to think about. You get one question, it's going to lead you down a rabbit hole into 17
Mm-hmm.
others. All
Yes, and
right,
it was so hard
so
not to talk about them. Let me just say, while we were doing this, that
yes,
one was my hardest one, not one to like break it down and be like, why did you ask that?
Yeah.
yes.
So,
You're jumping to metacognition.
So, all right, then let's take one of the open-ended questions and
okay.
change that to closed. So that was a closed to an open. So let's look at, why don't we look, let's see, let me find,
Sorry, let me scroll back up here.
why don't we look at 22? How did it feel to be able to put on a military uniform? We'll keep with our uniform questions.
So we're saying open to closed.
Yes.
Mhm.
Tell you, it was really intense to follow along. I'm glad my words per minute are pretty high.
I was impressed as you were going. I was
Yeah,
glad I did not get picked as the recorder for this. It's a lot of
I,
pressure.
I will say I always try not to be picked. And it is also very common to hear in groups as people are doing this for the quarter to be like, I need you all to slow down.
Yeah. Let's wait just a second. Yeah.
Which, and doing this in the classroom, it might be a good idea if you have a recording device to actually be able to record it so that you can go back through and like have recorders be able to fill in some things they might have missed. So that might be a strategy, again, if you're using this in the classroom.
Yeah, you need a quick
All right.
writer.
Yes. All right. So 22, how did it feel to be able to put on a military uniform? So
how do we answer this with just one word, correct? How do we change it so that it's
Mm-hmm. Can we put do they look happy to be putting on a military uniform?
yeah, that might be
Do
a good
they
one.
do they
I
look
will say that
proud?
for me, trying to rewrite open to closed is always, I think, the most difficult. I don't know why, but
Yeah.
that
Well,
Yeah.
because
one
you're
always
taking
is.
that detail and smushing it into one or two words. I think just to like it's easier to grade closed versus open-ended. It's going to be hard to like put everything together in one pretty box for
And
closed.
if you're thinking about the order in which these questions are generated, like we talked about earlier, often the closed-ended questions happen at the beginning. So this is when kind of
Mm-hmm.
deeper thinking has occurred. And so you maybe already asked questions that are kind of similar to what this would be changed to. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so it's like an additional layer of creativity you have to find.
Well, and I think also, and again, for some of our students, it may be that they've sort of answered some of these questions in their mind already,
Mm.
so that, you also get that layer added to it as well. Okay, so now let's think about, again, prioritizing questions. And you can do this in a couple of different ways. So you might, again, have students look at their questions and think about, you want to bring it back to the objective of the entire lesson, right? So for us, again, if we're thinking about, we're going to use this, our question focus as a starting point to launch us into research for our History Day focus. We might want to think about, which questions do we consider the most important? Which ones are going to help us with our research, which I think for, again, History Day is going to be probably a great way to look at it. You might also consider, can these questions be answered? Will they help me to, move my project forward? So again, think about those kind of things as you, again, help students to kind of prioritize. So let's think about this. First off, do we have any questions that we think can't be answered? And I think that that's something good to help students to think about, because kids sometimes will come up with great questions, but you're like, yeah, I don't know that you're ever going to find the answer to that question.
I think some of the ones about how they feel, right?
Yeah.
Unless we have their diaries or
Yeah.
letters or those will be more challenging.
Yeah.
Yes. I agree.
And same
Anything
with
that's
our
like,
question. Go ahead,
go
Layla.
ahead. I was just saying anything that's like super individual that we don't have
Mm.
sources for.
Um, Yeah, question 20, was this their first time to have their picture taken? Again, we're going to have to know who these people are to be able to begin to even try to track down the answer to that question. So that was going to be very difficult to answer. Yeah, I think our question about, what happened to these men afterward, like, that one may be answerable to some degree, but not without a higher degree of difficulty. Because again, we're still going to have to track down each person, and then lots of primary source records in order to try to figure out what happened to them. As
Right.
like each person in the group, you might be able to find one or two and kind of trace, but again, finding a larger group, that's going to be a harder question to answer.
Mm.
Right. So do you think number 23 and 24 then are things that potentially can't be answered?
I think 24 would be more challenging. I think 23, you could
Okay.
at least tangentially answer that question
Okay.
through various primary source materials, which you could pull in of USCT troops talking about, what it meant to be a soldier, to fight for the Union, to fight for the country, fight for their freedom. So I think that you could definitely build an argument and try to answer that question.
Okay.
So maybe, not those specific people, but
Yeah.
others in a similar situation.
Yeah.
Um,
So more of a, 30,000 foot view answer to that question as opposed to an individualized, the third person on the right felt this way about it.
yeah.
Yeah.
What about this question?
Yeah, I think that's probably not one that we could answer either.
Mm.
But again, if you're doing this for other purposes other than just research, that might make a fantastic writing prompt for an ELA activity,
Yes.
Mm.
a creative writing piece. So again, this is where sometimes this could, lead to some really interesting cross-curricular connections. All right, so let's pick out our 3 questions that we think are probably most important for research purposes. Again, thinking about if we were developing a research project for History Day around USCT troops.
Okay. And are these questions that are already created, or are these questions we're going to build off of?
Let's try to pick from the ones that we have, and then if
Okay.
we decide that we need to maybe combine a couple and rework them, then I think that
Okay.
that's something we can talk about.
Got it.
I think those grounding questions at the beginning are good for
I
research,
Yeah.
agree.
right?
I think we need to find out who these people are. Maybe not like this group specifically, but who's represented in this picture.
Yeah.
Who,
Yeah, I
where,
think the
when.
who, the when, and the where, and maybe again that is one where you could kind of combine those.
Yeah.
Like the context. What's the context
Yeah,
behind this picture?
yes. I also thinking, question 7, where are these men originally from? Because I think that gets at your motivation,
Mm-hmm.
their past experiences. Would also probably get into that. How do they feel about wearing the uniform?
Yeah, and we could dig a little bit deeper and even look at like enlistment
Mm.
papers and see where these men are potentially from,
Mm-hmm.
um, and then go to a more individualistic or an individual perspective from there. If we wanted to.
Yeah, were they free or
Uh,
enslaved prior to joining,
Mm-hmm.
yes. Yeah, because again, I think that, their families, were their families free or enslaved?
Mm.
Mm-hmm.
Again, I think that gets to motivation. Um, so that would be important to know. And I think the other thing I would want to know is 16. What happened to these men after the picture was taken? So what is the
Mm-hmm.
long-term trajectory for these men who fought in the USCT?
I'm gonna half and half it since we said that's one that would be hard to answer.
Yeah.
So I wonder, looking at this though, with let's see, 10, 12, or no, 10, 13 and 14, I think we could combine that into one as well and like really build that into context, to provide some more, I don't know, just some foundation on what we're
Mm-hmm.
researching.
Yeah,
So,
the motivation of the image itself, right?
right, right. So I think that would be something that we could just kind of shove together as well.
Yeah. Because if we're looking at like perspectives, it's not
Mm-hmm.
just the perspectives of the men in the photo, it's also of the photographer
Mm-hmm.
and the people kind of in charge of that unit.
Mm-hmm.
And again, that question of where was the photograph used?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, was that publicized more broadly? Um, and
So will
how
we
did
do,
and how did seeing an image like that impact general public who might have seen that picture of USC teachers, which again, as we get further down into the rabbit hole of the story, like, revolutionary, right? It's because people were not used to seeing African American men in uniform holding weapons. Like that is
mhm,
revolutionary for the time.
mhm. I highlighted who took this picture because I felt like it was connected to the kind of the contextual information there. So
Yeah.
So of course, here we have several questions that we would prioritize for our research. And then I think that kind of gets us into, well, now we need to probably go back and do some kind of deeper primary source analysis. So I think that we are done with this list for now.
I'm going to stop my
Um,
share then.
yes. So one thing that, again, as students are doing the process, that you might have them think about, again, if you're just focusing on the questioning process, again, how you're going to use the questions next, but you always want to build in time for some reflection, so that students can think about, what did they learn in the process of doing this questioning exercise, and then how can we use that to keep improving our questioning skills. So again, with TPS, with Teaching Primary Sources, we have always been big proponents of building in that moment for reflection. And again, I think with this can be equally important just for students to have a moment to consider, again, how this has given them some insights into their own thinking and question abilities. So let's talk now about some primary source analysis.
Okay. So this is something that everybody has probably used in their classroom at some point or been introduced to as a student in a classroom. Really what we're looking at here is most people would say your basic see, no, wonder, observe, reflect, question. But there are so many other ways to really dig into this and really align it to the History Day rubrics for each category. Really allow it to bulk up your research and really allow you to have those multiple perspective pieces and build that student voice throughout as well. Um, so in this, we have right here the observe, which is basically what we did before we started asking questions, right? In the first steps of this, we looked at it and we talked about, we looked at it and we said, basically, who are these people? Why are these people? So we did all of this in that first activity, but really we did observe, question, observe, reflect, and then question again. We kind of did all of these in different pieces here. And this is something just like the first activity that we did, the QFT, it can be harder for students, right? Because they want to start answering those questions before we make those initial observations, before we have the time to reflect. So building into this is really helpful to get conversation going, but also allow for everyone to come to the table in their own way when it comes to researching their topics and what they're interested in. So this is just an overview of the teacher's primary source guide. The student's guide is just a blank sheet with this observe, reflect question, and you could even have students do this on their own papers. And then we'll get into that further investigation as well in a minute. But on the next slide, we have this kind of explanation. There we go. Is it going to make you click through all of them? So this is really helpful. And again, like Kira said, this is not something that we created. This analyzing photographs and prints or primary sources is from the Library of Congress. And then the slide with the different aspects of this activity we also did not create. So just want to clarify on that. But it's such a helpful source, such a helpful resource and tool when you're teaching. So on this, you have students identify and note details when you're doing that observe. What do you see? What do you notice first? Really, what you saw us doing in the beginning of this session. So read this. This is where you look closely at the details. If there's text on the paper, you can say there's text there or put what it says, but you're not digging into what it means yet. We're not saying, well, this says, 1863, so here's the context for that. You're looking at just that it says 1863 or 1864 or whatever the time is and moving forward. And you're going to cite specific textual evidence. So it might be good to give students the picture and then after they've observed a little bit, give them the caption, give them the year of publication to really kind of continue to build those observation skills. On reflect, so this is where you push students to dig into those observations that they made. Think about the key details, the key ideas. Think about if there's any are there any words used in this text that you need to analyze a little bit deeper? Assess points of view, like we were saying, why are they using this picture? But then we kind of went into a whole rabbit hole of like who's using this picture? Why is this picture being used? So different pieces with that. So on that reflect, that can come, I think reflect comes after every step, honestly. So you observe, you do some reflection. You question, you do some reflection. You edit those questions and then you come back and do some reflection again. So these steps, again, they don't have to be boom, boom, boom in this order. You can use them to work for your classroom, but really having students observe first, ask those questions, or reflect on what they've observed, and then ask those questions, and then come back and reflect again. It's really important to dig into those sources. And it's a great way to show students how, especially when connected to History Day, all the editing that takes place when you're going through and creating a project and finding a topic. Um, I would say most people don't just first thing, this is my topic and I'm not doing any other editing. They're going to go in and they're going to refine. They're going to observe, they're going to reflect, they're going to question, they're going to observe, and it's just going to be a cycle, just like this activity that we have in front of you and just like the QFT that we showed you in the beginning. And a lot of times, this is something that it's like on this page, it kind of seems like an afterthought if you are just because you have to see no wonder. But further investigation is so important when digging into your sources and really broadening your research. So further investigations, how do we help students or how can students help their group members on projects, anything like that, or anything like that? How can they really identify questions and pull in other research efforts? So how can they really pull in other primary sources to, again, widen their research, strengthen their argument, and continue to build their thesis? How can they do that? So really important on this one. And so we looked at that picture of the USCT, and we, generated those questions, kind of thought about who, what, when, where, why, those closed-in questions, or closed questions and then open-ended as well, and broke it down. And that would be after that where you could add in more sources. You could just kind of place in more as you're researching to build those arguments or continue to refine your topic. So, Kira, is there anything you want to add on this?
Yeah, actually, that kind of gets to a point that I wanted to make. So, in thinking about History Day especially, but really anytime students are doing any kind of research, every time that they are gaining new pieces of information, whether that's, new sources that they're looking at, new primary sources, new secondary sources, things that you've taught them in class. We want them to constantly be coming back to reflection because every piece of new knowledge that they get, they should be coming back and again thinking about their initial observations and their initial questions and again continuing to refine those things because every new layer of information we need to go back and think about, okay, well, does that change how I was thinking about this picture? What new thing do I know now that helps me to better understand what's happening in this image of this USCT unit? So that again will help them to continue to again refine their research questions, refine their thesis for their projects, and identify where there might be holes in that research. And so again, thinking about what other sources might be used. So when you get to that again, further investigation piece, okay, where do I need to look to try to fill these gaps in what I don't know? What perspective is missing here that's going to help me to again be able to prove or disprove again where this information seems to be leading me. All right, so let's
Perfect.
anything
Yeah.
else, Layla, that you had for that one?
No, I think that really, I just wanted to make sure that we were showing how it connects specifically to not just History Day research and rubrics and everything else, but just the whole inquiry process in general. How you can dig in and learn so much just from, generating a few questions.
So, of course, this was the image we've used, and Layla and I actually used these images with Nikki this summer for a workshop for History Day, and with a primary source set that we are happy to share with you guys. Because again, the other thing that you want to challenge students as they are refining their questions is thinking about, is their topic too broad? And that's a whole other probably hour plus that we could get into. So we don't have time for that today, but again, to think about again, USCT, too broad of a topic for a History Day project, but maybe thinking about some specific soldiers or specific family members who are connected to some USCT troops might be a way to get at that. And so there are sources here in this primary source set that kind of get into the stories of an individual and a family that was at Mabry Hazen in Knoxville. And so we're happy to share these because I think it's a really fascinating story that it can, again, kind of build on some of the things that we've been talking about.
Yeah, and that link there will take you to specific sources about the Mabry Hazen house and John Franklin, who was an enslaved man who served in the USCT. He enlisted. And then also it has some sources from the Knox County Archives and East Tennessee Historical Society that aren't necessarily available through a web search. So you have these enlistment papers for John Franklin. He can tell you who he was, where he was from, answer those like beginning questions, right? And again, this is just some of his recruitment paperwork. This is something that is really a special resource to have, or special source to have. It is the Mabry Hazen slave schedule. And what's the year on that, Nikki? Is it 1830? 1860, excuse me.
1860.
Yeah, 1860. So this is giving you some background on John Franklin, his family unit at Mabry Hazen. And as you scroll down a little bit
I was
to
trying to see if I could
source,
make it. There we go. Make it a little bigger.
that's perfect. I need all the zooming in we can get. So you can see here, though, they're listed by family units. They are listed with their age, their approximate age, anything that could be a descriptor for them, um, the color of their skin. So how would you define this person on the street? Which is really interesting when you dig into, for example, other resources like papers when you're dealing with self-emancipation, because that's how they're going to use those resources as well. So really looking at John Franklin's story, this is the transcription of the Bill of Sale there. So this is all transcribed for you. It talks about all of the enslaved people within this family who are being being sold, being in this business transaction. So you have John's mother, and then you have John, you have his brothers and his sisters, and really with this research, you're able to dig into what happened to John Franklin after his enlistment, what happened to him after the Civil War. We were able to do some digging in that way as well. So just to really pull in those resources and tell a fuller story of maybe not the men in that first picture that we looked at together, but pull out an individual story that can provide us with really, really engaging topic for History Day and a really personal topic. You could bring in local resources or genealogical resources, things like that. So lots of stuff here. We also have, not in this packet, but a Meet John Franklin bio that Mabry Hazen typed up and sent to us. So a lot of resources that you could use here to really build on that further investigation piece and narrow down your topic in a way to focus on one specific person, one specific region, one specific story. So yeah, just a way that you can dig deeper while also telling a really rich history.
And I think, again, for our students thinking about History Day, we want them to think about, again, these big questions, but then again, that constant struggle of, how do we not take on a question that's too big for our History Day projects. So I'm sure Nikki has tons of other resources that can help to that. But again, if you guys have any questions about anything that we have shared today, please feel free to reach out to Layla and I. Here are our email addresses. And of course, we have tons of materials available through the Teaching with Primary Sources Southern Region website that you can see listed there. So with that, I'm going to turn it back to Nikki.
I think one of the most valuable things about the QFT, besides like getting to the metacognition point, the students thinking about their own thinking, which I think builds confidence. I think it helps students become more flexible with their own learning. I think it makes them a little more independent, right? We don't have to walk them there because they are getting to the point of thinking about their own brains. But I also think that using the QFT, this is something I was thinking about as you were saying, really broad topics, the challenge of narrowing it down. You could use the QFT to do that, and you could use it through framing it in the closed, opened, well, what source will we need to be able to answer that question? And if you start building out all these different sources that are so different from each other, maybe we're realizing that it's too big, right? If our questions are really expansive and, so how do we then maybe reframe our prompt and use the prompt itself as an indication of narrowing things down? I don't know. That might be a fun thing to explore, of using this to help narrow things down a little bit too. But thank you guys so much for walking through that. So as we went, I kind of tracked our process, and I'll save this as a PDF. I'll add some things in about each step of the way. But you can have this pulled up if you like having a sample when you're doing it yourself. It's nice to have that there. I'm going to share my screen one last time. All right, so going back from this, so I'll make this available for everybody. Again, you'll have to fill out that PD form to make sure I get you the certificate. It is always linked over here. These sometimes move around, but you'll always be able to find it in the box that says starter pack. It'll take you to a secondary Padlet, but this is that educator toolkit where you can also find resources from TPS as well, linked there. And that Padlet looks like this for the starter pack series. This first row right here, I have directions, but you'll click that, fill out a form, and I will get you your certificate. My name again is Nikki Ward. If you have questions for me or you want to be connected again with Kira and Layla, feel free to email me and I will do that. Well, thank you guys so much for walking us through that, and I appreciate your time.